The Galactic Council had convened once again after centuries of silence, and the atmosphere in the Grand Hall was thick with anticipation. Representatives from the universe's most powerful and advanced civilizations filled the room, their sleek, polished bodies and gleaming technologies as sharp contrast to the humble human presence. Earth had only recently been invited to sit at the table, its inclusion more of a formality than anything else. The galaxy's elite races looked down on humanity as a young and inexperienced species, barely a blip on the galactic radar, still clinging to the remnants of their primitive past. The seats of power were occupied by the Eldari, ancient beings who had long since mastered immortality, their wisdom stretching back millennia, and the Kathor, a cold and calculating insectoid race whose technological advancements were matched only by their disdain for lesser species. As Ambassador Marcus Hayes, the human delegate, stepped forward to address the council, he could feel the weight of their mockery, their eyes narrowing in amusement as they observed this mere human, so out of place among such grandeur. Hayes cleared his throat, his pulse steady despite the mocking glances and stifled chuckles that followed his every move. The Kathor, with their many-eyed faces, openly sneered at the thought of humans even being included in such a prestigious gathering. The Eldari exchanged looks that seemed to say everything. What could a species like this possibly offer? Despite the skepticism in the air, Hayes remained composed. He knew the other members of the council could not comprehend the true nature of humanity. It wasn't just about technology or age. Humanity possessed something far more formidable, an unyielding spirit. With a calm voice that carried through the hall, Hayes began to speak of Earth's history, of a species that had clawed its way from the ashes of its own mistakes. He spoke of humanity's resilience in the face of extinction, of battles fought and won with nothing more than the strength of will and an unwavering determination to survive. "We may be young, but we are survivors," he said, his eyes scanning the room. "Our greatest strength lies not in our advanced technologies, but in our ability to adapt and overcome. We will not be outwitted, outlasted, or outclassed." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Yet, the room erupted into laughter. The Kathor buzzed in derision, and the Eldari rolled their eyes. Even the more neutral races, those who hadn't outright mocked humanity, exchanged skeptical glances. The idea that such a young species, still so green, could hold their own against the galaxy's greatest powers seemed absurd. What did they know of the ancient forces, the threats beyond the stars that the Council had faced? To the galaxy's elite, humanity's very presence was a joke, but Hayes remained unfazed. His voice never wavered. "I understand your doubt," he continued, "but you will soon see that underestimating us will be your greatest mistake." The Council fell silent, their amusement replaced with an eerie tension, but many still regarded humanity as little more than an inconvenience in the grand scheme of things. Hayes knew this moment would be just the beginning, that proving humanity's worth would take more than words. It would require action. But as he turned to leave the council hall, a small, knowing smile crept across his face. Deep within him, a quiet certainty took root. Humanity's time to rise had come, and when it did, the galaxy would learn just how powerful the human spirit could be. The mocking laughter of the council still echoed in the air, but Hayes was no longer concerned by it. The galaxy might laugh now, but they wouldn't be laughing for long. Soon, they would see exactly what humanity was capable of. The laughter that had filled the Galactic Council chamber suddenly halted as an urgent, crackling transmission blared across the speakers. A tense silence fell over the room as the image of a high-ranking council officer appeared, his face pale and his voice shaking. "This is an emergency," he said, his eyes wide with fear. "We are under attack." The council members leaned forward, their attention immediately captured. The officer continued, "A massive fleet of Vardrax warships has descended on the galactic rim. They've already destroyed entire systems. They've obliterated planets, wiped out defenses. There's nothing left." The council hall erupted into a frenzy of whispers, the weight of the words sinking in. The Vardrax were no ordinary threat. They were a ruthless, savage species with a reputation for brutal efficiency in warfare. Their ships were colossal, their weapons capable of devastating entire planets with ease. For centuries, the galaxy had heard whispers of the Vardrax, but they had remained mostly in the shadows, attacking only when they were ready to strike decisively. No one had truly expected them to emerge again, but here they were, tearing through the galaxy with a ferocity that none had foreseen. The Galactic Council, with all its vast knowledge and technological power, found itself paralyzed. Despite their advanced fleets, none of the Council's races had ever faced anything like the Vardrax. Their ships were armored with materials stronger than anything the Council had ever encountered, and their weapons were devastating, capable of annihilating entire star systems. The Kefor, with their hive-mind tactics and unparalleled weaponry, had deployed their fleet to the front lines, but even they were retreating, unable to keep up with the Vardrax onslaught. The Eldari, immortal beings who had mastered countless technologies over millennia, had been forced into defensive positions, unable to pierce the Vardrax defenses, and the once mighty Arctarians, whose ships could normally outmaneuver any opponent, were now scattered and fleeing before the brutal might of the invaders. Every race in the Council, despite their power and influence, was being pushed back by the Vardrax with terrifying efficiency. It quickly became apparent that the Vardrax were not merely attacking, they were systematically wiping out everything in their path. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations, who had once looked down upon humanity as nothing more than a primitive species, were now scrambling to form a strategy. Desperation filled the council chamber. For the first time in ages, the great civilizations of the galaxy found themselves united by a common enemy. But as they gathered their forces, it became clear that the Vardrax had anticipated their every move. Their attacks were precise, and every counterattack by the Council's fleets was met with overwhelming force. The invasion was relentless, unstoppable. Panic began to settle in. "We have no options," the officer's voice crackled through the comms. "We can't fight them off. We can't even defend our own borders." The council members exchanged glances, some murmuring quietly, others with furrowed brows, their faces filled with doubt and fear. What could they do? The galaxy's collective might had failed them. There was no weapon in their arsenal capable of dealing with the Vardrax. They had become too powerful, too organized. Their strategy was flawless, and their forces seemed endless. The galaxy was on the brink of collapse. In the midst of this chaos, Ambassador Marcus Hayes, sitting quietly at the back of the council room, felt the weight of the moment pressed down on him. He had seen the fear on the faces of the council members, and he understood the gravity of the situation. The laughter had long faded, replaced by the tense, fearful air that now hung over the room. It was clear to him that the galaxy's greatest civilizations had no answer for the Vardrax. They were on the verge of losing everything. Hayes took a deep breath, his mind racing. He had seen this moment coming, the moment when humanity's strength would be called upon. The Council didn't know it yet, but humanity had a weapon the Vardrax couldn't anticipate: resilience. He stood, his calm voice cutting through the panic-stricken murmurs. "I believe we can help," he said. The room fell silent, the Council's eyes turning to him. For a moment, no one spoke. They had all heard his words before, how humanity had survived against impossible odds, how they had faced down extinction and emerged victorious. But this was different. This wasn't a skirmish or a battle. This was a galactic war against an enemy that seemed unstoppable. Hayes could feel the skepticism in the room, but he stood his ground. "We may not have the largest fleet, the most advanced weapons, or the longest history, but we have something you don't," he said quietly. "We have the will to fight. And if you'll allow us, we'll show you how humanity faces an enemy like the Vardrax." The council was silent, and Hayes knew the next few moments would determine whether humanity would be treated as the galaxy's savior or its final downfall. The Vardrax were coming, and only one question remained. Would humanity rise to the occasion, or would they fall like so many before them? As the council's debates grew more heated and desperate, Ambassador Marcus Hayes remained calm, his gaze unwavering. The council members, most of whom had once dismissed humanity as an insignificant player in the galactic stage, were now scrambling for answers. With the Vardraks continuing their merciless assault, every race in the room was at a loss for how to fight back. The most advanced civilizations of the galaxy had failed, and a deep sense of uncertainty loomed over the entire chamber. For a moment, it seemed that the council might fracture under the pressure, torn between fear and frustration. But then, as if cutting through the chaos, Hayes stood once more. The room fell into a hushed silence as his confident voice filled the space, each word hanging heavy in the air. "I know you doubt us," he began, his tone calm but resolute. "You've underestimated humanity, but that ends now. We have something you don't, resilience. And we have a weapon that none of you possess, a weapon forged through centuries of struggle, survival, and relentless will." There was a palpable shift in the room. The council members exchanged wary glances, their skepticism clear. What weapon could humanity possibly have that could stand against the Vardraks, an enemy so powerful that even the greatest fleets of the galaxy were faltering? Hayes knew that his words alone wouldn't convince them. They needed to see proof. He paused, letting the silence stretch before continuing, his voice now more serious, even intimate. "You've never seen anything like it before," he said. "It's not a weapon of pure destruction, nor one of overwhelming power. But it's something much more dangerous: adaptability. We've spent centuries adapting, learning, and overcoming. And that ability is what has allowed us to create a fleet capable of facing the Vardraks." The council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, uncertainty and intrigue slowly replacing their earlier disbelief. Hayes pressed on, revealing a secret humanity had long kept hidden, one born of Earth's darkest days. "During the darkest chapters of our history, when survival was all that mattered, we developed something, a technology," he explained. "It was built in secrecy, a weapon designed to survive in the harshest of environments. It's a technology born not from raw power, but from ingenuity. We reverse-engineered it, adapted it, and refined it. What we have now are ships, fleet ships, that are small but deadly. And most importantly, they are designed specifically to exploit the weaknesses of the Vardraks." The council members exchanged cautious glances, still unsure of the specifics. "What do you mean by weaknesses?" asked the Eldari representative, his voice sharp with skepticism. Hayes met his gaze, unflinching. "The Vardraks rely too heavily on brute force," he replied. "They have the firepower to obliterate, but their ships are designed with limited flexibility. They cannot adapt as quickly as we can. We've spent our entire history learning how to survive against overwhelming odds, how to make do with less, to turn seemingly small advantages into winning strategies. Our fleet, though smaller than yours, will strike where the Vardraks do not expect it." A murmur spread across the council as Hayes continued. "We've built our ships with the Vardraks' weaknesses in mind. They are designed to be maneuverable, to fight with speed and precision, not raw firepower. Our ships can evade the Vardraks' massive weapons, hitting them in places they're not designed to defend. This is our advantage." The room grew quieter still, as the council members absorbed the implications of his words. While their ships were large and impressive, they were also cumbersome, their tactics predictable. The Vardraks' might was their greatest strength, but it also made them vulnerable to any race with the creativity and will to exploit their flaws. "You claim you can defeat them with these ships?" asked the Kethor delegate, his voice dripping with doubt. Hayes nodded, his expression serious but not arrogant. "Not just defeat them," he said. "We can push them back. We can force them to retreat. We can turn the tide." A heavy silence followed, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone in the room. Despite the skepticism, there was a growing sense that humanity might be onto something. The idea of using adaptability, rather than brute strength, had always been humanity's strength, and now, for the first time, it seemed that the galaxy might finally recognize it. Hayes could see it in their eyes, the hesitation, the glimmer of hope. But hope alone wouldn't win the war. It was time for action. "The Vardrax might have the firepower," Hay said, his voice steady, "but we have the heart. And that's something no weapon can destroy." The room was still, as the council members took in his words, uncertain of what was to come but realizing, for the first time, that humanity might indeed have the key to winning the war. The battle was not over yet, but with humanity's hidden weapon now revealed, there was a glimmer of hope in the darkness. The council had hesitated at first, unsure of whether they could truly rely on humanity's unproven fleet. But as the Vardrax pushed deeper into the galaxy, obliterating everything in their path, the council had no choice but to accept the humans' offer of assistance. The Vardrax were not just a threat, they were a force of nature, and with each passing day, their advance seemed unstoppable. Humanity's fleet, which was nothing like the grand armadas of the Council's civilizations, was hastily assembled from a patchwork of Earth technologies, old warships and makeshift vessels built from years of ingenuity and sheer will. They were small, often clunky, and vastly outmatched in terms of raw firepower. Yet, for the first time in the war, humanity was given the chance to show what they were truly capable of. As the human ships took their place on the front lines, there was a deep sense of uncertainty. The Council watched from their command center, skeptical of what the human fleet could accomplish. The Vardrax, with their mighty warships, were on the verge of complete dominance, and no one believed that humanity's Galactic fleet could make a difference. But then the battle began. The Vardrax, expecting an easy victory, charged in with their overwhelming numbers, their weapons ready to strike. The humans, however, didn't engage in a head-to-head confrontation. Instead, they employed tactics that none of the Vardrax could anticipate: guerrilla warfare. The human fleet, small and nimble, darted in and out of the battle, luring the Vardrax into carefully planned traps. They used their ship's superior maneuverability to their advantage, darting through asteroid fields, diving into nebulae, and weaving in and out of star systems that the Vardrax were ill-prepared to navigate. It was a style of fighting that the Vardrax could not counter. Their massive warships, designed for brute force and direct confrontation, were simply too rigid, too predictable. The humans struck fast and hard, exploiting every blind spot, every weakness the Vardrax had, before vanishing back into the chaos of space. For every Vardrax ship that advanced too far into a trap, another human vessel would appear, striking at the enemy's flanks, and then disappearing before the Vardrax could retaliate. The result was nothing short of miraculous. One by one, the Vardrax ships began to fall, their once unbeatable force now being systematically dismantled by the humans' unorthodox strategies. Even the Vardrax, with their superior weaponry, couldn't keep up with the unpredictability of their opponents. The battle that followed seemed almost too improbable to believe. The Vardrax, known for their ruthlessness and strategic brilliance, were now at the mercy of the humans' guerrilla tactics. With each successive strike, the tide of the war began to shift. The Council, watching from their command center, couldn't believe their eyes. For the first time, they saw something they had never thought possible: the human fleet was winning. Their ships, that were small and unrefined, were proving to be far more effective than the Council had ever imagined. The humans had not only survived the initial onslaught, but had begun to turn the tables on their much larger and more advanced foes. The Vardrax ships, which had once seemed invincible, were now falling one after another, unable to adapt to the relentless barrage of human ingenuity. The shockwaves of each victory rippled across the galaxy, and the Council members began to realize that the humans were more than just survivors. They were warriors in their own right. As the battle came to a close, with the human fleet having inflicted considerable damage on the Vardrax forces, the once skeptical Council members sat in stunned silence. They had thought humanity's presence on the Council was a joke, a mere formality, but now they were witnessing firsthand the power of human determination and adaptability. The humans had not just held their ground, they had struck a powerful blow against the Vardrax, buying precious time for the Council to regroup and mount a more coordinated defense. It was a moment that would go down in history. As the human ships withdrew from the battlefield, the galaxy's great civilizations stood in awe. They had been wrong about humanity. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time there was hope. Hope that the Vardrax could be defeated. Hope that the galaxy and all that they had built could be saved. The humans had proven their worth, and in doing so, had changed the course of the war. As the war against the Vardrax raged on, the tide was slowly but surely turning in humanity's favor. The Vardrax, who had once viewed their enemies as mere insects to be crushed underfoot, were now facing an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. The human fleet, though small and seemingly underpowered, fought with a ferocity and cunning that the Vardrax had not anticipated. The Vardrax were used to overwhelming their foes with sheer numbers and raw firepower, using terror as a weapon. But against the humans, fear had no effect. The humans fought not just to survive, but with a deep, unshakable resolve. They refused to back down, even when the odds were impossible. In space, the human ships continued to outmaneuver the Vardrax, using the same guerrilla tactics that had proved so successful in the early battles. But it wasn't just the ships that showed humanity's strength, it was the humans themselves. On the ground, human soldiers fought in the trenches of hostile planets against overwhelming enemy forces. They had no advanced armor or superior weaponry, but they made up for it with their sheer resourcefulness. Makeshift weapons, scavenged alien technology, and the will to never give up were their greatest assets. When the Vardrax sent their war machines to take planets by force, the humans fought back with everything they had. They hid in the rubble, they crafted deadly traps, and they turned the terrain itself into a weapon. Against the Vardrax's mechanical might, the human spirit proved unbreakable, and it was this very spirit, the will to survive, adapt, and overcome, that made humanity so dangerous. The Vardrax could destroy entire planets, but they could not destroy the unyielding hearts of the humans who fought to protect them. The Galactic Council, once full of smug superiority and laughter, was now silent as they watched humanity's rise. The Eldari, long used to their own kind of immortality and calm wisdom, looked on with growing respect. They had underestimated humanity's resolve, thinking them to be a weak, primitive species. The Cathor, proud of their advanced technologies and hive-mind precision, were now witnessing the power of human unpredictability and adaptability. The humans fought with a fierce independence that was unlike anything the Council races had seen. There were no great fleets or monumental weaponry to match the Vardrax's strength, but humanity's drive was unstoppable. The humans were not bound by the rules that governed the other races. They didn't fight for honor or glory. They fought for survival and for each other. And that was something the Vardrax had failed to understand. On the battlefield, the Vardrax could destroy countless ships and cities, but they couldn't crush the human spirit. It was too strong, too ingrained. And this determination was contagious. As the war dragged on, more and more species began to see the value of humanity's unconventional methods. The Arcturians, once doubting humanity's worth, sent their most experienced soldiers to join the fight. The Xalithians, a peaceful species renowned for their scientific minds, began offering their technological expertise to the human forces who were always eager to adapt and innovate. Even the Zobrians, a race of beings who had never seen combat, now rallied behind humanity's banner. All over the galaxy, the once distant races began to rally behind the human cause. The Council, watching the progress unfold, began to realize that humanity was more than just a survivor, it was a leader. The humans' refusal to yield, no matter how overwhelming the threat, had sparked something in the galaxy's other civilizations, a fire, a sense of unity, a will to fight back against the Vardrax. The galaxy, which had once looked down on humanity as an insignificant race, was now looking to them for leadership in this fight for survival. And as the humans continued to fight on, their spirit growing stronger with each victory, the Council began to see the true strength of the human race, not in their weapons, but in their unbreakable will to survive. As the war with the Vardrax reached its breaking point, the Galactic Council, once so dismissive of humanity, found itself turning to Earth's forces for leadership. The humans, who had fought so fiercely for their survival, were now at the forefront of a daring operation that would go down in galactic history. Ambassador Marcus Hayes, having proven the strength of humanity's will, stood as the commander of a united fleet, a ragtag group of species, from the brave humans to the once neutral Arcturians, who had now placed their faith in the humans' ingenuity and leadership. With their combined might, humanity and its new allies began to turn the tide in ways the Vardrax had never imagined. The Vardrax, once invincible with their overwhelming numbers and brute force, found themselves facing an enemy that had learned, adapted, and evolved from every engagement. The human fleet, utilizing a blend of cunning tactics, guerrilla warfare, and the technology they had reverse-engineered from alien races, began to dismantle the Vardrax's military infrastructure from within. It wasn't just brute force that won the day. It was the cleverness, the unpredictability, and the relentless drive of humanity that began to wear down the Vardrax advantage. They infiltrated Vardrax command centers, slipping in unnoticed, using stealth and precision that the enemy was ill-prepared for. They hacked into their communication networks, severing the lifeline that held the Vardrax forces together. Without their usual coordination, the Vardrax fell into disarray. The humans knew the Vardrax's strength lay not in their firepower alone, but in their ability to strike as a unified force. Once that unity was broken, the Vardrax were no longer the unstoppable juggernaut they once were. The human fleet, working in tandem with their allies, systematically dismantled the Vardrax's forces, cutting off supply lines, disrupting reinforcements, and picking off vulnerable targets. The Vardrax, once so sure of their victory, were now scrambling to adapt to the humans' ever-shifting strategies. The final move came swiftly. Armed with intelligence gained from their infiltration, the human fleet prepared for a final, coordinated strike on the Vardrax flagship, a massive warship that had been the heart of the invasion. With all their forces united, the humans and their allies launched a surprise attack, hitting the flagship from multiple angles in a precision strike that caught the Vardrax off guard. The flagship, once thought invincible, was caught in a brutal assault. The human fleet, though smaller and less powerful in comparison to the Vardrax's overwhelming forces, had the element of surprise on their side. They struck hard and fast, exploiting every weakness in the enemy's defenses. The Vardrax flagship, riddled with damage and chaos, finally crumpled under the pressure of the human-led assault. With one devastating blow, the tide of the war shifted irreparably. The Vardrax, their command structure in ruins and their flagship destroyed, could no longer maintain their invasion. The galaxy held its breath as the news of the victory spread, and the once unstoppable force of the Vardrax was now in full retreat. The humans had done the impossible. They had not only survived, but had crushed a Vardrax invasion, halting it in its tracks. The Galactic Council, stunned by the unexpected turn of events, could no longer deny what had become clear. Humanity was no longer just a participant in the galactic struggle, they were its leaders. The galaxy's future, once uncertain, now held a new possibility, one where humanity, with its indomitable spirit, would take the lead in protecting the galaxy from any threat that dared to challenge it. As Hayes and his fleet looked out over the battlefield, the sense of triumph was bittersweet. The victory had come at a great cost, but it was a victory born from human will, courage, and the unbreakable spirit that had first been underestimated. The humans had proven that they were not just survivors, they were the future. The battle was over, but the war for the galaxy's future had only just begun. In the aftermath of the war, as the dust settled across the galaxy, the Galactic Council convened once more. The Grand Hall, which had once echoed with laughter and mockery, was now heavy with quiet respect. The council members, who had once dismissed humanity as nothing more than a fledgling species, now looked to Earth's representatives with a newfound understanding. Ambassador Marcus Hayes, who had stood before them countless times in the past, now found himself in a room where there was no sneering, no ridiculing. There was only silence, the kind of silence that spoke volumes. The war with the Vardrax had left its mark on the galaxy, and humanity had played a pivotal role in its outcome. Hayes stood before the council once again, but this time, the weight of his words carried the power of 1,000 victories. His voice, steady and calm, resonated throughout the room. We may not have the longest lifespans, the most advanced technology, or the most powerful fleets, he began, his gaze sweeping across the room, meeting the eyes of the representatives from countless species. But we have something that you cannot take away, a will to fight, to survive, and to protect what we love. And that is something no army can ever defeat. The words hung in the air, and for a moment there was no sound. The other species, once so certain of their superiority, knew that Hayes spoke the truth. They had watched humanity rise from nothing, overcome insurmountable odds, and win a war against a foe that even the most powerful civilizations could not face alone. Humanity had shown them that raw willpower, determination, and adaptability were just as important as technology and firepower. And in that moment, the Council understood what they had never truly grasped before. Humanity was not just a member of the galactic community. Humanity was an integral part of the galaxy's future. One by one, the representatives nodded in agreement. The Eldari, whose near immortality had often made them aloof and indifferent, acknowledged the value of humanity's fierce spirit. The Kefor, with their cold precision, recognized the unpredictability and adaptability that made humans so formidable. Even the Arctarians, who had once viewed humans with skepticism, now stood in solidarity with them. The once rigid hierarchy of the Council had shifted. No longer was humanity seen as a mere footnote in galactic history. No longer were they the weaklings or the primitive race that the galaxy's more advanced species had once believed. Humanity had proven that it was not only capable of survival, but of leading the charge when all seemed lost. The lessons learned from the war would echo through the stars for generations to come. From that day forward, humanity was not just a member of the Galactic Council, they were its fiercest defenders. Their reputation as warriors who would never give up, no matter the odds, had spread throughout the galaxy. And with that reputation came responsibility. The galaxy now looked to humanity, not just for their courage, but for their leadership. The Council was no longer just a gathering of races trying to coexist. It had become a unified force, with humanity at the forefront of the charge. The other species no longer viewed their strength as an excuse to dominate, but as a shared responsibility to protect the galaxy from the dangers that lurked in the void. As Ambassador Hayes stepped down from the podium, the weight of history on his shoulders, he knew that this was only the beginning. The galaxy, once full of uncertainty and strife, was now bound by a new era. One where humanity had proven that even the smallest and youngest species could rise to defend the stars. The war was over, but the fight for the galaxy's future had only just begun, and humanity, with its unbreakable will and spirit, would be ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson: never underestimate the heart of a human.